So in theory, we all like Politifact. In theory, we like people fact-checking stuff that's being said in the news by politicians and newsmakers and what have you. That's a great idea. Politifact, not really the best. They need a fact checker. We need a Politifact fact checker. And that's what we're going to do right now. So, Bernie Sanders. So Bernie Sanders wants to send everybody to college tuition free, which I've explained on this show before. It could happen easily in America. Can we afford it? Yes. Without blinking, we could afford it in America, okay? So I've heard the number $60 billion. That's what it would cost tuition-free colleges in America. Some people say $75 billion. It's $60, $70 billion, somewhere around there. Okay. PolitiFact decided to fact-check Bernie Sanders on that. Bernie Sanders says Wall Street tax would pay for his free tuition plan. So here's what PolitiFact says. They say Sanders estimates that his plan to make undergraduate tuition at public colleges and universities would cost about $75 billion annually. Based on his proposed College for All Act, the federal government would fund two-thirds of that cost using a tax on Wall Street trading. But participating states would have to kick in the remaining costs. So, according to PolitiFact, Bernie Sanders' tax on Wall Street will fund two-thirds of that $75 billion. I disagree about those numbers, so do some other people, but we'll just go with PolitiFact. I mean, I think the numbers are more favorable to Bernie's position, but so Bernie says that they say it'll cover two-thirds. Here's what the Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center analyzed Sanders' plan and put the yearly revenue from the Wall Street tax at around $50 billion to $60 billion. Much more modest, but still enough to cover. So Bernie Sanders says he says he could possibly raise $300 billion from his Wall Street tax. But here we are. We're going to settle on 75. They say the Nonpartisan Tax Policy say 50 to 60 billion.
But they are inherently a conservative organization in the sense that they underscore.
Right. So, okay. So, by the way, 60. So, here we go. Then they say, this is PolitiFact. Then they say Sanders' $75 billion proposal is a federal matching program, meaning the Wall Street speculation tax would cover two-thirds of the cost. They said it again, two-thirds of the costs. States would be required to pick up the tab for the remaining one-third. So one-third of the cost, according to PolitiFact, would be funded by the states, two-thirds funded by the federal tax on Wall Street. There is some question if some states would participate in the program. Recently, states have refused to be part of Medicaid expansion under a more generous style of cost sharing. So they're saying, hey, some of the states might turn down the federal money for free college, just like they turned down the federal money for Medicaid, the free federal money for Medicaid. A lot of Republicans, on principle, pandering to their base, turned down health care for the poorest people in their state, which everyone knows is economically a bad idea, and it's morally a horrible thing to do.
Right.
And bad economics. I'll say that twice. So two-thirds of that is bad economics. So I got one more for you. Sanders, so here's what they conclude. So they just said, by their own admission, PolitiFact says that Bernie Sanders' plan will cover two-thirds. Two-thirds. Here's what they conclude. Sanders has a point that his proposed Wall Street tax would cover part of the plan, but he left out the significant state contribution. And it's not a sure thing that every state would join in, so we rate his claim mostly false.
Wait, wait a second. Aren't states already? I mean, aren't states already basically paying for state university programs?
There is tuition at state universities. That's what we're talking about. There are already. So he's saying making it tuition free. They just admitted. By the way, their numbers are not correct. So they're taking the lower number from the. But they're taking the from the tax policy, the nonpartisan tax policy. They're taking the 50. So if you take the $60 billion from the nonpartisan tax policy center, if you take that number, that's 80%. $60 billion is 80% of $75 billion. So If you take the numbers from the Tax Policy Center, Bernie Sanders' plan covers 80% of the tuition for colleges nationwide. 80% if you take that number. What did Politifact say? Mostly false. Mostly. Not a third false, not 20% false, not mostly true, which is what it is. It's overwhelmingly true. So what they're saying is because there's a bunch of redneck governors who are assholes, Bernie Sanders is a liar. That's what they're saying, because there might be some Southern governors who won't want to participate in this program. Bernie Sanders is a liar.
But they're already participating in this program. Part of what Bernie Sanders has pointed out is that, or what he's talking about is, these are already subsidized universities and colleges.
States
that
already
are state colleges and also community colleges that are already locally and state subsidized. What we're talking about is paying the difference between the subsidy and the completion of tuition. So, for instance, a UC system, I think it's maybe $6,000, $8,000 a semester now. The federal government would pick up that last $6,000 to $8,000, but it's $6,000 to $8,000 already because it's a UC program. Because large parts of the California government,
you're saying the tuition right now is already subsidized by
heavily.
the state, or else, and if it wasn't getting funds from the state, tuition would be even higher at colleges. Is what you're saying?
Oh yeah,
yeah. So we get that point, and yeah, that's a great point. Politifact, I have to say, wrong. Just because you put a fact after polita doesn't mean it's correcta. It's not. Their own admission, 2/3, which it's actually higher. It's 80%. Their own admission is 2/3, and then they go, "We rate this mostly false."
50 is 2/3 of 75.
50 billion is 2/3 of 75.
Yeah, so they're right on. The math all works out perfectly.
But they're saying mostly false
because of the governors, the idiot governors.
They're saying that some governors might not participate.
Turn it down to hurt their
so
own
they
people.
might not get that last. Well, if you take the 60 billion number, they won't get the last 15 billion. So mostly.
Okay,
Again, I don't have to.
Jimmy, I got to ask one question really quickly. How much do we give the banks every month?
So during quantitative easing, people need to remember this, which took place for at least 2 years, right? A long time.
Oh,
at least, if not longer than that.
It went on.
So
through
what happened was that they would give 60 to 80 billion dollars a month.
Okay, what?
60 to 80 billion dollars a month.
Well, that's why we can't afford public
would
education.
go right
everybody.
to Wall Street banks for free. 60 to 80 billion, and they what's called quantitative easing. You know, anyway, so it's what that is welfare for the richest people in the world. And what they're saying is that, hey, we can't afford 1 month's quantitative easing to send every student in the nation to college for a year. So there you go. Politifact, not so facty. It's like Politi-wish. We wish it was mostly false, but it turns out we can send everybody to college in America very easily. But our Politi-wish is that that's not true because somehow we've been beaten down in this country to think that liberalism doesn't work, even though the rest of the world is proving it to us on a daily basis that it works. Denmark is proving it, the happiest country in the world. Look at our other Denmark video. They make $20 an hour working at McDonald's. You know why? Strong unions, great economy, happiest country in the world. Politifact.